Get ready for Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes, the 30-minute show packed with an hour's worth of information, bringing you familiar guests on important issues such as immigration, education, the Middle East, culture, religion, and the changing worldviews of Americans and the world. You've seen her on Fox News, you've read her on the World Wide Web. Now here's Sharon.
For such a time as this.
Freeing the minds of the brainwashed masses.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of Changing Worldviews today. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry will travel to Kiev, Ukraine, on Tuesday amid the country's escalating tensions with Russia, according to the Obama administration. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said it is, quote, crucial to restore calm and proceed to an immediate de-escalation of the situation. President Obama and President Putin also talked via telephone for 90 minutes on Saturday. Iranian official of the Islamist Baji military force in Tehran ran a special military exercise last week preparing for an Iranian takeover of Jerusalem. Iranian officials said, quote, we are preparing to liberate Jerusalem. Tens of thousands participated in the exercise and terrorists in trainings flocked to the program from dozens of Baji battalions. 12 Years a Slave wins the Oscar for Best Picture at the 2014 Academy Awards, and Best Actor goes to Matthew McConaughey for Dallas Buyers Club. And listen to who he gives thanks to.
First off, I want to thank God, because that's who I look up to. He's graced my life with opportunities that I know are not of my hand or any other human hand. He has shown me that it's a scientific fact that gratitude reciprocates. In the words of the late Charlie Lawton, who said, when you got God, you got a friend.
Russia has issued an ultimatum to Ukrainian forces in Crimea to cut out by 5 a.m. on Tuesday or face, quote, a military storm, according to Russia's state-run news agency. Ukraine officials insist that while Russia's military is going from base to base in Crimea and demanding Ukrainian forces surrender, there is no official Russian ultimatum that they're aware of, only psychological pressure and threats. In the meantime, on Sunday, Republicans mounted attacks against President Obama over what they consider his inappropriate response to the crisis in Ukraine. Representative Mike Rogers said, Putin is playing chess, and I think that we are playing marbles. And that's what we're going to be talking about on today's show with my guest, author and former Pentagon official, Mike Rubin, to talk about his book, Dancing with the Devil, Engaging Rogue Regimes. You don't want to miss this. Stay with me. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Sharon Hughes, coming to you from the Wild, Wild West, and we mean wild.
Thanks, everyone, for staying with me. Okay, so I spoke last week with Mike Rubin, author of Dancing with the Devil, Engaging Rogue Regimes. And here is part one of that interview, so pertinent to what is going on in the Ukraine and Russia, in the Middle East, in America. Here it is.
So, let me ask you a question. Are we dancing with the devil, or are we in a boxing ring with Russia? Today, the Washington Times reports that Secretary of State John Kerry hailed Hollywood to make clear that Russian President Vladimir Putin better listen up. He said, this is not Rocky IV. And he was referencing the popular Rocky movie, obviously, which was about, the American Rocky Balboa, played by Sylvester Stallone against the Russian giant Drago. As a warning, evidently, Kerry was warning Mr. Putin to respect the Ukraine and let it govern itself. Well, in an interview with MSNBC, Kerry insisted, quote, this is not Rocky IV. Believe me, we don't see it that way. His remarks were aimed at informing Mr. Putin that the United States wasn't regarding its relationship with Russia as a sort of continuation of the Cold War. Well, he made these remarks after Mr. Putin ordered his military to take part in a massive drill to assess its combat readiness. And the drills are set for an area of Russia that borders the Ukraine. Well, my guest today says that we are dancing with the devil and outlines the perils of engaging rogue regimes. I'm talking about Michael Rubin, who's a former Pentagon official and AEI scholar, and he's with me today to talk about the important issues he raises in his brand new book, Dancing with the Devil, The Perils of Engaging Rogue Regimes. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for being with us today and sharing with our listeners your experiential knowledge regarding these issues.
Thank you for hosting me, Sharon. It's a pleasure to talk with you.
Okay, so I've got a few questions here. Let me just set it up a little bit, and then we're going to get your take on them. In 2 short years, the Ukrainian president turned his country into a rogue regime, and Russian President Vladimir Putin, it appears, is seizing the recent opportunities, such as what's going on now, to support rogue regimes in the Ukraine and Syria and Iran, and using them, as I think you talk about, in proxy battles against the United States and the West. So, in your book, you say not all opponents are equal, nor do the roots of all our problems lay in solvable grievances. So what do you mean that not all opponents are equal specifically, and how does this tie into what's going on right now with Putin and the Ukraine and Russia and all that?
Well, Sharon, one of the biggest ironies I see out there is that American diplomats pride themselves on being culturally sensitive, but fundamentally misunderstand multiculturalism. They understand multiculturalism as appreciating all of our differences, being able to go into a sushi restaurant and order a mojito. Fundamentally, however, they need to recognize that our opponents can think in very, very different ways, and we shouldn't project our own sincerity on them. So when we look at the Ukraine, for example, President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry may honestly want to have a diplomatic solution. They may see any sort of successful diplomacy as leading to a win-win situation, but they need to understand that for Vladimir Putin, he sees international relations as a zero-sum game where Russia wins, the U.S. loses, and therefore we need to ensure that there's not simply an even playing field on the Ukraine.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Now, you wrote, quote, if Putin and his Ukrainian puppet, who is now no longer, in power, are successful in crushing the aspirations of the Ukrainian people, the Russian leader, Putin, will set his sights on returning Russia to its rightful place, quote unquote, as the dominant influence in the Baltics and so forth, and perhaps even try to undercut peace and stability in Poland. Now, now that the situation has turned here the last couple of days, what do you want to say about that? I mean, where are we at right now on this issue?
Well, I think we're really at the end of the beginning rather than the beginning of the end, Sharon. And what we need to understand is that Vladimir Putin has delusions of grandeur. He wants to restore Russia to dominate what he considers to be his near abroad, which are the former states of the Soviet Union, as well as Eastern Europe, and that's why I brought in Poland, that we need to understand that what happens in Kiev doesn't stay in Kiev, and therefore, while no one's talking about putting U.S. troops, for example, in Ukraine, and I certainly wouldn't support doing that either, we need to recognize that all our allies in the region are watching to see what we do. And if we don't show that we have their back, for example, by selling Poland or offering Poland anti-aircraft missiles like they've been wanting, or supporting the forces in the Baltic states, that we ultimately are going to force them to make a concession or to make some sort of alliance with Russia. Because, I mean, if we don't show that we support our allies, they will make their own concessions and cut their own deals.
Very, very interesting. Okay, so you titled your book Dancing with the Devil. Explain what you mean.
Well, basically what I'm trying to show is while there's this notion out there, and it's been voiced by President Obama, it's been voiced by Hillary Clinton as well, that it never hurts to talk, that if you're not going to talk to your enemies, then who else are you going to talk to? And what I want to show, and what I tried to show with this book, which is essentially a history of the last half century of American diplomacy with rogue regimes and terrorist groups, that talk, ill-considered, can actually have a very high cost and can sometimes actually lead to or catalyze conflict. So I'm not against talk. I just think that the way the U.S. State Department understands it today is oftentimes very, very wrong.
Yes, and of course we've heard the last few days all about how President Obama and Hillary Clinton's reset, right? She gave him the reset button with Russia. You, I believe from what you're writing, you believe that that's naive, especially because it's assumed that the problems in relations have more to do with, well, I want to say Obama and Hillary Clinton think that our problems have to do more with their predecessors rather than the dictator who's in the Kremlin. Is that correct?
That is correct, but I'm not against talk with the Russians by any means. And President Obama will point out the fact that Ronald Reagan sat down with Mikhail Gorbachev, but what he forgets or what he willfully ignores is the fact that that happened after a multi-year military buildup in order to set the right circumstances and establish leverage. In the White House today and in the State Department as well, leverage seems to be a dirty word. And unfortunately, we are sitting down trying to get Vladimir Putin to take us seriously at a time when he sees us as steadily eviscerating our military while he's in the midst of a buildup.
Okay, so as a former Pentagon official and so forth, what do you think about the downsizing of our military, both our troops? I believe they want to get it down to what it was, 1947 level or something like that, if I'm correct on that. And then just President Obama's, kind of disarming us, if I can use that term, on many levels in terms of our military strength. What do you think about them doing that in today's world?
Well, Sharon, first of all, let me be clear that there's a lot of waste in the Pentagon, and I certainly saw a lot of waste when I was there. That said, it's important to cut the Pentagon budget with a scalpel rather than with an axe. To me, as I was studying for 5 years and traveling to places like when I was doing the research for this book, Iran, I stayed with the Taliban in Afghanistan. I met with the ISI, the intelligence folks in Pakistan who were sheltering Osama bin Laden, and I went right up to stare down North Korean soldiers on the DMZ. It's important to recognize that the biggest difference between left and right today is that the left always demonizes power, whereas the right understands that power can be used for either good or for bad. I came from a very progressive liberal background. I spent 14 years in a Quaker school outside of Philadelphia, and I had absolutely no concept of what some of these enemy regimes were actually up to. But the important thing is many of my former classmates and colleagues don't recognize that if the United States is no longer able to project power on the world stage, that vacuum is going to be filled in a way that is going to hurt us and hurt us tremendously with reverberations that they can't even imagine.
Absolutely. It's like king of the mountain in the playground, right? If the one that's sitting up at the top decides, okay, I'm tired or I'm going to leave the mountain, somebody else is going to take the place, or they'll fight others to get there, whether they really have the same strength as the original guy. It's amazing what's going on. One other question about how the United States sees its allies as partners, but Putin and many of the Russians really see partners, quote-unquote allies, whatever, as client states. That's a term that you use. Do you want to describe that?
Well, absolutely, and this goes into that same concept that I tried to bring out in Dancing with the Devil, that we've got to stop projecting our own values onto our opponents. And certainly when we sit down with Denmark or France or Mexico, we negotiate and we try to come to this understanding, a win-win situation. We see what they want. We try to figure out how to make it work. The Russians don't see allies that way. They see allies as someone who should take dictation and do everything with absolute obedience, and this is one of the reasons why the Ukrainians, for example, don't want to be allies with the Russians. The reason this whole problem started in the Ukraine, of course, is that the Ukrainians had been campaigning for years to have a European Union association agreement. The European Union actually offered them one. At the last minute, Vladimir Putin in Russia said to Ukraine's president, I'll give you $15 billion if you don't sign with them, and you sign with me again. And he turned down the European Union. And next thing Vladimir Putin said is, I said $15 billion, but what I actually meant was $2 billion. And he's telling the Ukrainians how to act. Of course, the Ukrainians don't like that. And what we need to recognize in the United States is that people do like individual liberty, they do like freedom, and it's not sophisticated to downplay that in international affairs.
Yes, very well said. We're going to take a really quick break here, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in just a little over a minute. We've got lots more to talk with Michael Rubin, author of Dancing with the Devil.
Exposing the worldviews behind the political, cultural, and ideological wars molding the minds of Americans and the world today.
In fact, Hitler wrote fan mail to the associates of Margaret Sanger of Planned Parenthood, who also was a eugenicist and who wished to eliminate the existence of two-thirds of humanity through her methods.
Changing Worldviews encourages listeners to get engaged and help turn the tide. It's everyone's civic responsibility.
Are we going to use this technology and knowledge to help and elevate people, or are we going to use our knowledge and technology to suppress them, to harm them? This is the goal of the eugenics movement and those who have allied movements.
Won't you help continue to stay on this station in your area and reach even more listeners with a financial donation? Go to www.changingworldviews.com donate page and give either a one-time contribution or become a monthly partner. Or send your check to Changing Worldviews, P.O. Box 750624, Petaluma, California 94975-0624. Please make a donation today.
It's time for The Legal Edge, a look at your rights as a Christian, a parent, and a citizen. And now, with a look at what's happening on the legal front, the president of the Pacific Justice Institute, Brad Dacus.
We've all heard lawyer jokes. In fact, many don't see much good coming at all from the legal profession. But the truth is, lawyers have a unique opportunity to right the wrongs and be legal defenders of precious God-given rights, such as the freedom of religion, free speech, and parents' rights over their children's upbringing. However, many attorneys who might want to donate time to defend these freedoms simply don't know where to start. Perhaps you are such an attorney, or maybe know of an attorney likely to value this kind of work. If so, just have them contact us at pji.org. That's pji.org. I'm Brad Dacus.
To find out more about The Legal Edge, call 916-857-6900 or log on at pacificjustice.org.
Thanks for staying with us, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to encourage you to tune in to my regular show that originates out of the San Francisco Bay Area on our flagship station, KDIA, AM 1640, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday at 4:30 p.m. Today is a special edition of the show at an unusual time for us, but we wanted to get Michael Rubin on the show to talk to us about his book, The Perils of Engaging Rogue Regimes. Really, Dancing with the Devil is the main title, and he is a former official with the Pentagon, and with everything that's going on in the Ukraine and Russia and so forth, there's so much to talk about. We wanted to be able to, address this issue with somebody that knows really what's going on there. Michael, in a minute we're going to give you opportunity to tell our listeners the best way to get a hold of your book, which we appreciate. I appreciate that you have written and that you're trying to get the word out. Now, Vladimir Putin seeks to restore Russia, I believe, I think you believe from what you've written, to all of what he considers its former glory. And he has set his sights on returning Russia to, can we say, its rightful place as the dominant influence in the Baltics and so forth. But he's even trying to undercut peace and stability in Poland, as you already have brought out. But people forget. You can put him on the front of Time magazine as a Person of the Year or whatever, or President George W. Bush could say, I looked in his eyes and I saw, this great guy or whatever, and on it goes. But in reality, they forget that he headed the KGB.
Certainly, and he has that very Machiavellian worldview. If you're going to put Neville Chamberlain up against Machiavelli, Chamberlain's not going to win.
Yeah. So, we call our show Changing Worldviews because it's the worldviews behind the issues that give us an indication of what's really going on here. Also helps us to understand what position we want to take, because issues don't exist in a vacuum. They're all connected primarily by the worldviews of the players. And so, how important is it for the American people to remember what we're dealing with when we're dealing with Russia? They don't want, maybe the Russian people do, but the leaders certainly do not want liberty and freedom and democracy in Russia like the people do in the Ukraine that are trying to, protest for.
Well, this is one of those interesting aspects that when I said before that what happens in Kiev doesn't stay in Kiev, what actually keeps Vladimir Putin up at night is that it could just as easily spread to Moscow. Because while the Russian people really did like the way that Vladimir Putin had picked Russia up from the doldrums, picked it up by its bootstraps, restored the economy, over the last couple years, the economy in Russia has really stagnated. There's a Levrada Center poll that's a nonpartisan Russian think tank. It's not affiliated with the Russian opposition, which found that 22% of adult Russians wanted to emigrate away from Russia. And many of the children of the elite actually are sent abroad to school and don't want to come back to Russia. They might be Russian nationalists, but they see it conceptually. They don't want to have to live there because of the stagnation. Russians are actually calling Vladimir Putin the second Leonid Brezhnev. That's not a good thing for Vladimir Putin.
Now, I'm trying to find my notes on this. I talked about this on the show last week, but and this is a little bunny trail here. But of course, we know the Olympics were in Russia. That I believe Putin was trying to put himself on the international scene here. But he is supposed to in September host the Congress of Families, and this does tie together. And he is touting himself or trying to present himself as the defender of the Christian faith. What do you know about that, or want to say about that? It's pretty silly given the history of Russia and his positions, and wanting to tout himself as the defender of Christian values. I understand he's divorced and has a mistress and all of that. So, how does he see himself in your estimation, or is that just unrelated to what we're talking about?
Well, ultimately, he may want. What he wants to do is to try to co-opt the Russian Orthodox Church and to remodel it in his own image. In a way, that's an infringement on religious liberty, because the Russian Orthodox Church should be independent of Vladimir Putin. But if I could just broaden out the discussion for a second, one of those conclusions I had in my book, which was looking at a half-century of American diplomacy with rogue regimes, is that there's a tendency in Washington to want to whitewash our opponents in order to convince ourselves that diplomacy can work. But if you really want to know what the canary in the coal mine is, you have to look no further than religious liberty, because regimes that are targeting Christians, targeting Jews, targeting other minorities are not regimes that we can trust at the nuclear negotiating table.
So then when we see reports that says that he has been a defender of these Christian values and so forth, we have to take it with a grain of salt, right?
Oh, he controls the press, so they're going to describe him the way he wants to be described.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so we've only got, a little bit time left here with you, and I know you've got lots of other interviews coming up, but here's an area that I really want to focus on that you write about, and many people are saying that President Obama's lackluster response to the Ukrainian protests has been par for the course. Under Obama's watch, protesters rose up in order to shed the yoke of Iranian tyranny, and the White House was silent. Syrians sought to escape from their anti-American regime, and Obama sat on his hands. Now, in the Ukraine and even in Venezuela, people are seeking freedom, and Obama appears to be turning his back. It just appears that in each of these cases, the aspirations of the people for freedom and liberty coincided with American national interests, but the White House seems to care less, or as you write, so much for hope, so much for change. What do you want to say about that?
Well, it seems that sometimes we actually try to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. The fact of the matter is, when people say it never hurts to talk, oftentimes, whether it was with Bashar al-Assad, whether it was with Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, or Vladimir Putin, the reason why Obama's aides said he wasn't more forthcoming, he didn't speak up with moral clarity, is because he didn't want it to get in the way of a diplomatic engagement. And again, this shows that our priorities are messed up, because having freedom, having liberty is far more important than just getting our adversaries to the table so they can sit around, drink water, and agree to talk a month later.
Very, very interesting.
And now for my closing thoughts. Why do the nations rage? The question is asked in the Bible. Well, with all the unrest around the world, specifically in the Ukraine and the aggressive steps that Russia's Putin is taking, we're going to be talking about this very issue all week on the show, as we did today with Mike Rubin. And Friday, my interview with Yuri Felstinsky, author of Blowing Up Russia, The Secret Plot to Bring Back KGB Terror, to talk about the real Putin. And you may be at this point wondering not only what in the world is going on, but can anything be done to stop the raging of the nations? Well, on one hand, yes, there are things that can be done. On the other hand, the Bible tells us that some of the things that are going to happen because of the evil intent of those who want to rule the world. And I was thinking about phrases today. I know you've heard the one, speak truth to power. I prefer saying speak truth to lies. And chances are you've probably heard some statements such as, well, God doesn't care about political issues. Christians should stay neutral. There's nothing that can be done, so let's just take care of ourselves. But all of these are subtle delusions designed to shut down your influence on the direction of American life or our nation or our world. After all, if those statements were true, then why did the Apostle Paul on foot travel the entire region of his day to bring the truth, to speak truth to lies, to bring the truth of what will bring peace on earth? These points of view that God doesn't care about the culture, God doesn't care about these things, really has been responsible, I believe, in great part to muting Christians and eliminating our viewpoint from the national discourse. The goal of a secular society is to censor the biblical worldview from our culture. And the correct response is not to be passive. The correct response is to get engaged and to speak truth to lies. I mean, if not you, if not me, who? And if not now, when? We are going to be watching this, so I encourage you to stay tuned every day, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday here on KDIA, and then, of course, on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday for our online live streamed show. In the meantime, let me encourage you to stay aware, stay alert, because we are not only living in a changing world, but we need to be informed and know what's going on, and we also need to educate those in our family, our friends, and spheres of influence. And so until I see you next time, this is Sharon Hughes, saying it like it is.
Thanks for listening to Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes. You can get more information on today's topic or order a CD of today's show by visiting changingworldviews.com or writing us at Changing Worldviews, P.O. Box 750624, Petaluma, California, 94975-0624. You can also contact us at talk@changingworldviews.com. That's talk@changingworldviews.com. Our program is listener-supported, and we appreciate your tax-deductible donations to help us get the truth out on the important issues Sharon addresses on the show. So until next time, remember, stay alert, stay informed. We live in a changing world.